Ever since I was a kid, I was the biggest Batman fan. Whether that was watching the Nolan Batman trilogy every weekend, reading the comic books that were on the shelf at my middle school library, or reenacting the Dark Knight interrogation scene in my high school drama class, Batman was clearly a formative character in my life. So going into the theater to watch the new Batman, Batman 2022, I had my doubts. I was doubtful that this film could compare to its predecessors, whether Matt Reeves' Batman was going to hold a light to the Dark Knight trilogy. However, sitting in that theater and watching every scene unfold, it finally hit me. What I was watching wasn't the Batman I was familiar with when watching Nolan's adaptations. I was watching an adaptation of Batman that was more true to the comic books than ever before. The Batman 2022, for all intents and purposes, is the closest we've seen a comic book version of Batman be actualized in cinema. What we see is a Batman that isn't just a crime-fighting vigilante. Rather, equally as important, we see Bruce Wayne realize himself as a detective. Without getting into any spoilers, the villains in this movie are carefully chosen to be able to accentuate the detective nature of Batman. No other major release of a Batman film has touched on this layer of the character, and trust me, this detective aspect of Batman is masterfully done. I know I mentioned the villains before, but it is very difficult to put those conventional labels on these characters. Oftentimes, in this movie, the lines are blurred between the forces of good and evil. I found myself questioning the motives of the protagonists the same way I would antagonists. This isn't a conventional superhero movie where the hero comes and saves the day. No, this is a movie where the protagonists are forced to submerge themselves in evil for a greater good. And it isn't just the main characters that do this. Every supporting actor in this movie has a role to play. There is never a time in this movie where you feel like there's a character that doesn't belong. Literally every character has their unique role to play, and each of them are casted in such a way where they embody the character with such chilling accuracy. But as for the main protagonist, Batman, Robert Pattinson does an amazing job. It honestly still shocks me how well he did as the character. In a weird way, it feels like Robert Pattinson was made for this role. And the same can be said about Catwoman, being played by Zoe Kravitz. Kravitz is so convincing in the role that I found myself perplexed by how believable she was as a character. I also want to touch on the flow of this movie. This movie flowed effortlessly from start to finish. It felt like Matt Reeves treated the film as a puzzle, and every scene was just another piece of the puzzle being added until the audience was able to figure out the bigger picture. In other words, you live alongside these characters in their efforts throughout the movie, and you never feel like an outsider looking in. Moving on, the soundtrack of this movie is phenomenal. Every song only makes the movie feel more immersive as the film goes on. If you can, I highly recommend watching this film either in IMAX or Ultra AVX. There's a certain level of magic in this movie that comes throughout in the soundtrack, and those viewing experiences, in my opinion, would be the best way to experience those sounds come to life. If there's one final thing I would say about this movie, do not go into it having any sort of expectations or predictions. I promise you, what Matt Reeves, the actors, production crew, and everyone else working on this film do is nothing short of amazing. There is no way you can be prepared for this film. It truly is a Batman film through and through, and I wish all of you have an amazing time when watching it. I'm Rational Chimp, and I'll see you next time.